but I just wanted to concentrate on the pressing issue of the Seanad LNG project and the government's persistence in defending its retention on the PCI list, despite Ireland's unequivocal opposition to using fracked gas in our energy mix. The Climate Advisory Council has not given consideration to non-territorial emissions, even though it is in their remit to do so. And as you quoted Professor John Fitzgerald earlier, he also said in committee he described gas emissions as a distraction. Deputy Naughton on TV3 described discussions on fracked gas as a sideshow. I put it to you, Minister, that there are grave concerns that the Government seeks to roll back on Ireland's anti-fracking commitments. As you're proposing to commission a report on the security and sustainability of Ireland's energy supplies, it is imperative that you understand that this report will be meaningless if it does not include the assessment of non-territorial emissions. As Professor Barry Mullen put it in his evidence to the Climate Action Committee on October the 9th, we currently delegate responsibility for those emissions to the US. However, and as is the US's frequent tantrums and continuous threats to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, all bets are off, and we will have to look at our own responsibility much more closely. Minister, we have a co-responsibility in our climate change obligations to do no harm to others and to do no further harm to our planet in pursuit of our own mitigation. There is no circumstances under which frack gas can be a component of Ireland's future energy mix, none whatsoever. Minister, I will finish by calling on you to ask to prevail upon the Taoiseach to stop trolling the citizens of this country and start taking the climate obligations seriously. He has done a grave disservice to the science and the glaring evidence of climate chaos, while giving comfort to those unable to see the wood from the trees. Thank you very much.
Minister, I'm going to focus also now on LNG and the LNG terminal proposed. This is something which is fundamentally at odds with not only our climate action plan, but also with the decision in Ireland to ban fracking, and also with indeed the decision to divest from fossil fuels. Because we need to be clear, fracked gas is a fossil fuel. And we are looking in the LNG terminal, and we had very strong testimony from Professor Howarth, cited literally thousands of times, as to the impact of methane which emerges during the process of fracking and indeed its transportation. A tonne of methane has 34 times the impact of a tonne of carbon. And what's really crucial is that the methane acts faster. So while we've been told that gas is a transition fuel that is somehow going to give us the space to do what we need to do, the fact is that fracked gas, with the methane associated in its production, is in fact an accelerant. It is not giving us space to act, it is shortening the time we have to act. Because the impacts of methane production, again, 1/3 of which all of the methane production currently in the atmosphere, coming through the atmosphere, comes from fracking in the United States. That one source, a business which we would be supporting if we went ahead with the LNG terminal, that leads to higher temperature, greater absorption by the climate, and again, a shortening of the time to do the kinds of massive cultural shifts that we need to do. And it's very important, it was mentioned, this idea that non-territorial emissions don't emit. We're on one planet. We're facing one crisis. And it's simply not acceptable that upstream costs would be disappeared somehow from a kind of a clean ledger that we manufacture. And that's important on a global level as well. We see, for example, Japan and Europe have signed a trade agreement which has the climate targets in it, but meanwhile Japan is funding coal-fired plants in Bangladesh. We cannot simply move the problem offshore and hope that it will somehow not blow back to hit us. And certainly in a week when the US is making definitive, clear moves that they plan to pull out of the climate accord, we cannot have anything that rewards climate vandalism or irresponsible action in terms of fracking in a country. I mean, the Minister, everybody, Ireland, indeed the Taoiseach, were very eloquent about Mercosur and their concerns about not taking actions that would encourage violation of our climate targets in that regard. We need to be consistent. So, Minister, I urge you to mull back in terms of PCI. And I would also note there's been a little bit of a sense of, well, we're waiting and seeing and it's a private industry that's happening. It's not. Let's be clear. By putting it on the projects of common interest list, the language here says projects of common interest shall become an integral part of the relevant regional investment plans under Article 12 and the relevant national 10-year network development plans under Article 22. So we are saying that we want to make this a priority if we go ahead with it. We are placing it at the centre of our national plan. It's certainly not a private enterprise that is happening separately. Minister, I urge you to take any action you can in relation to this.
Acting Cathaoirleach.
I'll just vacate the chair for a couple of minutes to make a contribution, and thanks Senator Humphreys. Thank you.
No, Senator, I'll be very strict on your time.
Cathaoirleach, and thank you for obliging me. And it's been a very interesting debate, and I'm just going to confine myself to one particular aspect of it, which won't surprise anybody here, and that is the Seanad LNG project. I'm in the House 12 years now, and I think my maiden speech here was asking for the government of the day to support that project and to put everything they could behind it. Here we are 12 years on, and unfortunately we're still very beleaguered. And I want to say to you, Minister, and I compliment you, because I read closely what you said in the Dáil, and you were under fierce pressure from people of, we say, environmentalists and from the Green Party, and extraordinarily, to me, people of the extreme left. And I would say to the Green Party, they better mind their clothes, because if they don't, the Trotskyites and the people on the left are going to take them over. We have a new party formed already, I think, Trotskyite Green. So, you know, and everybody now seems to know everything about LNG. When I was talking here 12 years ago, and 10 years ago, and 8 years ago, and 6 years ago, no one had a clue about it, and no one had anything to say about it. And the reason it didn't get to go ahead in those days was because one individual succeeded, as he was entitled to, going through the process and delaying it. And his fear at the time had nothing whatsoever to do with what we're talking about here today. Perhaps Senator Higgins doesn't know this. The fear at the time was safety. There was every kind of a story put out that this LNG would be explosive, volatile, dangerous, and in fact, empirical evidence showed that not to be true at all. But nevertheless, because of the process that was there at the time, the project was halted long enough for the principals behind it to get windy and to get nervous about their money and their investment and to pull out. All right, local people, local money, a local businessman persevered. He got new money around him. He brought in a whole new project. It was subjected to, I don't think any project in the history of this country has been subjected to such scrutiny. And yet again, because they ran out of time, technically, it was obliged to go back again into the public domain. By which time, Uncle Tom Cobley and all are getting on the Seanad LNG bandwagon. It's the greatest bandwagon now, in my view, since the bandwagon against Carnsore Point Nuclear Power Station, which was put forward many years ago by the great Des O'Malley. And I thank the Minister for, I won't say stonewalling, but for holding his ground in relation to the projects of common interest. Because that project is essential in the long run to our energy security. The people who will be most affected by any downsides are the people of Kerry and Clare, and we are 99% in favour of it. We have taken Tarbert Power Station, oil, we've taken Money Point, coal, we've taken Ahanish alumina, and we have welcomed all those because we need jobs. We need jobs. And, you know, the world is about people. I can't get these people who care so much about humanity, but they don't seem to be troubled about the problems of individual people. And I represent an area, or I'm a senator from an area, where there is widespread immigration over decades. Towns and villages decimated. We can't put a football team out there, where before we'd have 4 teams competing with each other. And I know the Minister, you're aware of this. And we don't know eventually, and as you said yourself, you won't approve of any project in Ballylongford or Tarbert or anywhere that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and right you are, and we're prepared to accept all that. But it's essential that we have the option. At the moment, the focus is on fracked gas. We don't know what kind of gas will come in here eventually. There may be changes, there may be improvements, there may be new methodology, but it's important that Ireland would have a terminal to receive clean gas if it comes into us in liquid form and transmogrified back into gas, creating loads of jobs, 500 jobs in construction, creating a new power station from the off-spin of it. And, you know, no one seems to be looking at that. It's very frustrating for people. I'd love you to hear and sit down with the people of North Kerry. I really would, just to listen to how they view all what's going on up here. Now we have the Hulk against us. We have Cher against us. And they're putting out a rumour now that the blooming Pope is against us. So I say to you, Minister, hang tough. Take on the Hulk, take on Cher, and if you have to, take on the Pope itself. Because this project is going to get over the line sooner or later, and we'll be damn glad of it.
Minister.
Well, first of all, can I just thank senators for what has been a very interesting and encouraging debate in many ways. And I'll try and deal with some of the points. Obviously, I can't deal with all. I suppose the issue that has generated the most heat is around LNG. And I suppose just to explain the position, liquid natural gas, LNG, liquefied natural gas, it can be fracked or it can be not fracked, but equally, the supply that comes in from Scotland can be fracked or not fracked. So fracked gas can go into any delivery. I think the reason why CNG, the LNG project in Shannon has created such controversy is that it is an American-sponsored one, and it does raise the issue of fracked gas. Now, the evidence that has been cited is one that I think we do need to look at, and I'm very conscious of that, and that's why I did make the announcement that I'm going to have a security and sustainability investigation, and I will not support any funding for this project until I'm satisfied on that. That has, and that paper that has been presented, it does present evidence that is disputed, let's be said, not everyone agrees with it. He advocates putting a loading on methane of 86 to 1. The present, our EPA uses 25 to 1. So he's arguing that methane should be treated in a completely different way than is now the consensus approach. He also produces grounds, and again it's arguable, saying that the methane emissions from fracking and from shale oil and gas is far higher than from natural gas, and I think that evidence has to be examined, of course, to see. And I raised this with Europe, and it too. But I think, to be fair to Senator O'Sullivan, the reason why these projects have been on the projects of common interest is that gas remains a transition fuel. As we move, and our ambition is to have 5 times as much renewables. So instead of 30% renewables, it'll be 70%. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we need something to power our system. At the moment, that is gas. There is no other option available to us. In time, we may see hydrogen. We may see, carbon capture and storage. We may see different technologies emerge that allow that. Bigger batteries, more Thurlock Hill type projects, though they're very expensive at the scale we'd need to do it on. So none of these are available to us at the moment. Gas is the transition fuel. We depend, and Europe depends largely on imported gas, a lot of it coming from Russia. So they do see a security of supply issue and having alternatives, and LNG terminals are such an alternative. And that's why it has been on the projects of common interest in Europe for 6 years. But the key and the only advantage being on that common interest is that it could be eligible for state aid, and we have made very clear that we will not support it for such aid until we're satisfied about the robustness of what is being proposed, and examining fracked gas, but also examining this whole gas transition, the role of gas in transition. Some people, particularly in the lower house, have been advocating no more exploration for any fuel. When that was tested by the science at the Climate Advisory Council, oil was out, but we should continue to prospect for gas, because we need it in this transition. And I think we do have to make decisions on the evidence, not just on instinctive, that we don't want any more fossil fuel technology. We are in a transition. It won't happen overnight, and it is a challenging one.